Every December, something strange happens across the Western world. Millions of people cut down trees or buy plastic imitations of trees and drag them inside their homes. They hang glass balls and strings of lights on the branches. They place a star or an angel on top. They surround the base with wrapped boxes. They hang socks over their fireplaces. They tell their children that an immortal man lives at the North Pole, where he monitors the behavior of every child on Earth. He knows when they are sleeping. He knows when they're awake. He knows if they've been bad or good. And once a year, on a single night, he breaks into their homes through the chimney while they sleep. Parents bring their children to shopping malls to sit on this stranger's lap. The children tell him their desires. He promises to fulfill them if they've been good. This elaborate lie continues for years. Parents gaslight children who express doubt. They leave half-eaten cookies and bite marks in carrots as evidence. They write letters in disguised handwriting. And then, eventually, they reveal that none of it was real. That they had been lying, systematically, for the child's entire conscious life. And the children are expected to be fine with this. If you described Christmas to someone who had never heard of it, if you explained it objectively, without the cultural context, it would sound insane. It would sound like a fever dream, a mass hallucination, a society-wide ritual whose meaning has been lost, but whose forms persist. And in a way, that's exactly what it is. Christmas is the most celebrated holiday in the Western world. It generates hundreds of billions of dollars in economic activity. It dominates 2 months of the calendar. It shapes childhoods, stresses families, and runs on a mythology so deeply embedded that we've stopped seeing how strange it is. And almost nothing about it is what we think. The date is wrong. Jesus Christ, whose birth the holiday supposedly celebrates, almost certainly wasn't born on December 25th. He was probably born in spring. The winter date was chosen for entirely different reasons. The traditions are pagan. Christmas trees, Yule logs, gift-giving, feasting, decorating with holly and mistletoe. None of these have anything to do with Christianity. They were absorbed from older religions that the church couldn't eliminate. The jolly gift giver evolved from a violent bishop who once punched a man for heresy through centuries of transformation that included demons, child-terrorizing monsters, and a deliberate corporate rebranding in the 20th century. And the timeless traditions we consider ancient were mostly invented by Victorians less than 200 years ago, then amplified by advertisers who saw an opportunity to sell things. Tonight, we're going to unwrap Christmas, not the presents, the holiday itself. We're going to peel back the layers of mythology and commerce to see what's underneath. We'll answer the questions you've probably never thought to ask. Why December 25th? If Jesus wasn't born then, why did the church choose that date? Why do we bring trees inside our homes and decorate them? What does that have to do with Christ's birth? Who was St. Nicholas really? And how did a 4th century Turkish bishop become a flying home invader in a red suit? Why did the Puritans ban Christmas? What were they so afraid of? Who is Krampus? And why did children across Europe spend Christmas terrified of being beaten and dragged to hell? How did Charles Dickens, a struggling novelist, accidentally invent the modern meaning of Christmas? And what is Coca-Cola's actual role in creating Santa Claus? None of this is arbitrary. Every tradition has an origin. Every symbol has a history. And almost all of those histories have been deliberately obscured, sentimentalized, or erased. Before we continue, I want to ask you something. If you believe that the traditions we practice deserve to be understood, that the gap between mythology and history is worth exploring, you can help us continue this work by liking this video and subscribing. Your support allows us to keep digging into the stories we've forgotten. Tonight, we will walk through 7 chapters of Christmas's hidden history. We'll go back 2,000 years to Roman orgies and Germanic blood sacrifices. We'll meet saints and demons, Puritans and poets, advertisers and factory workers. we'll trace how a winter solstice celebration became a Christian holy day, became a Victorian family ritual, became a global commercial engine. By the end, you'll never look at Christmas the same way. You'll see the pagan bones beneath the Christian skin. You'll understand that when you hang ornaments on a tree, you're participating in a ritual older than Christ. When you tell your children about Santa, you're passing down a mythology assembled from Turkish bishops, Norse gods, Dutch traditions, American poetry, and corporate advertising. Christmas is a Frankenstein's monster of a holiday. Pieces stitched together from a dozen different sources, animated by commerce, given meaning by sentiment, and kept alive by sheer repetition. We've forgotten what the pieces were. Tonight, we remember. Welcome to the late mysteries. Before there was Christmas, before there was Christ, before there was Rome, or writing, or civilization as we know it, there was the darkness. Every year, in the northern hemisphere, the days grow shorter. The sun rises later and sets earlier. The shadows lengthen. The warmth drains from the world. And for ancient peoples without electric lights, without central heating, without any scientific understanding of why this was happening, the darkening of the year was terrifying. What if the sun didn't come back? This wasn't an abstract fear. It was existential. The sun provided everything: warmth, the growth of crops, the rhythm of life. If the sun continued weakening, if the days kept getting shorter, everything would die. Humanity would freeze in eternal darkness. And every year, around December 21st or 22nd, the darkness reached its peak. The winter solstice, the longest night of the year, the day with the fewest hours of sunlight, the moment when the sun was weakest, when it hung lowest on the horizon, when it seemed most likely to simply give up and disappear. And then, miraculously, it stopped. After the solstice, the days began lengthening again, just slightly at first, a minute or two of extra light. But it was enough. The sun was returning. The darkness would not win. Life would continue. This was worth celebrating. This was worth ritualizing. Every culture in the Northern Hemisphere developed winter solstice celebrations, festivals of light against darkness, rituals to encourage the sun's return, feasts to provide hope in the coldest time. And December 25th, the date we now call Christmas, falls just a few days after the solstice, close enough that ancient peoples could observe the days beginning to lengthen, close enough to celebrate the sun's rebirth. This is not a coincidence. Christmas is on December 25th because that date was already sacred, already a time of celebration, already a festival of light. The Christians didn't invent this timing. The Christians didn't invent this timing. In ancient Rome, the weeks around the winter solstice were dominated by Saturnalia, a festival honoring Saturn, the god of agriculture, time, and liberation. Saturnalia began on December 17th and continued for nearly a week, through December 23rd. It was the most popular holiday in the Roman calendar, a time of celebration, feasting, and deliberate social chaos. During Saturnalia, the normal rules of Roman society were suspended, schools closed, courts closed, no punishments could be administered, and gambling, normally illegal, was permitted. Sexual restraints were loosened. The toga, the formal garment of Roman citizenship, was set aside in favor of casual clothing. Most remarkably, the social hierarchy was inverted. Masters served their slaves at dinner. Slaves could speak freely, even criticize their masters, without fear of punishment. A lord of misrule was appointed to preside over the festivities, often a slave or commoner given mock authority. People gave gifts, small presents, candles, wax figurines, gag gifts, sometimes money. The gifts were called sigillaria, and giving them was an expected part of the celebration. They feasted on enormous meals with excessive drinking and indulgence of every appetite. The Roman poet Catullus called Saturnalia the best of days. They decorated. Homes were adorned with greenery, laurel, ivy, and holly. Candles were lit everywhere, pushing back against the winter darkness. Does any of this sound familiar? Gift giving, feasting, decorating with greenery, time off from work, the suspension of normal rules, general license to overindulge. Saturnalia was Christmas before Christmas. It was everything we associate with the holiday, minus Christ. But Saturnalia ended on December 23rd. What happened on December 25th, specifically? In 274 AD, the Roman Emperor Aurelian established a new holiday, Dies Natale Solis Invicti, the birthday of the unconquered sun. This was the feast day of Sol Invictus, the sun god who had become increasingly important in Roman religion. December 25th was chosen because it fell just after the winter solstice, the moment when the sun, having reached its weakest point, began to strengthen again. The sun was reborn. The unconquered sun had conquered the darkness once more. Dies Natali Solis Invicti was a major festival celebrated with games, feasts, and rituals. The sun god was honored at the moment of his annual resurrection. This holiday existed alongside Saturnalia, extending the festival season. Romans would celebrate Saturnalia from December 17th to 23rd, then celebrate the sun's birthday on December 25th. Nearly 2 weeks of winter celebration centered on the solstice and the return of light. And it was into this world, a world that already celebrated December 25th as the birthday of a god, that Christianity arrived. Rome wasn't the only culture with winter solstice celebrations. Far to the north, the Germanic and Norse peoples had their own traditions. They called it Yule. Yule was a midwinter festival, lasting approximately 12 days, from the solstice through early January. It was a time of feasting, drinking, and sacrifice. Animals were slaughtered, their blood offered to the gods, their meat providing sustenance through the dark months. Great logs were cut and burned. The Yule log. These enormous pieces of wood would be lit on fire and kept burning for the 12 days of the festival. The fire provided light and warmth, pushing back the darkness. The logs burning was a ritual, a magical act that helped ensure the sun's return. The Norse god Odin was particularly associated with Yule. He was believed to lead the wild hunt, a ghostly procession of spirits that rode through the winter sky during the darkest nights. Odin flew through the air, riding his 8-legged horse Sleipnir, accompanied by the dead. Think about that image, an old man with a long white beard, flying through the winter sky, associated with a list of the dead and the living, accompanied by a magical creature with an unusual number of legs. Odin also had ravens, who served as his eyes and ears throughout the world. He knew everything that happened. He knew who had been good and who had been wicked. The Yule goat, the Julebak, was another important figure in Norse and Germanic tradition. Originally associated with Thor, the goat eventually became a gift-giving figure. In Scandinavian countries, the Yule goat would bring presents, a tradition that predates our modern Santa Claus. The Germanic peoples also decorated with evergreens, branches, reeds, entire trees. Evergreens were magical plants, greenery that stayed alive through winter when everything else died. Bringing them into the home was a way of bringing that magic, that life force, inside. Yule traditions didn't disappear when Christianity spread north. They were absorbed. The 12 days of Yule became the 12 days of Christmas. The Yule log became a Christmas tradition. The evergreen decorations became Christmas decorations. And the figure of Odin, old, bearded, flying through the winter sky, keeping track of human behavior, contributed something to the figure who would eventually become Santa Claus. When was Jesus Christ actually born? The Bible doesn't say. The Gospels describe the nativity story, the manger, the shepherds, the star, but they don't give a date. Early Christians didn't celebrate Christ's birthday at all. Birthday celebrations were considered a pagan practice, something the Romans and Greeks did. Christians celebrated death days, the days martyrs died and entered heaven, not birthdays. When later Christians tried to figure out when Jesus was born, they had to work backward from clues in the text. The Gospel of Luke mentions that shepherds were keeping watch over their flock by night when Jesus was born. In Judea, shepherds typically didn't stay in the fields with their flocks during winter. It was too cold. They brought the animals inside. This suggests a birth date in spring or fall, not December. Some early Christian writers proposed dates in spring, March, or April. Others proposed dates in fall. December was not generally considered. So why December 25th? The first reference to December 25th as Christ's birthday appears in a Roman almanac from 354 AD. By this point, Christianity was the official religion of the Roman Empire. Emperor Constantine had converted in 312 AD, and Christianity's victory was complete. The church faced a problem. Pagans were still celebrating their winter festivals. Saturnalia, the birthday of Sol Invictus, Yule. These traditions were deeply embedded. People weren't going to stop partying just because they were now officially Christian. So the church made a strategic decision. The same decision they would make with Samhain and All Hallows' Eve. The same decision they would make throughout the ancient world. Instead of fighting the pagan festivals, they absorbed them. December 25th was already the birthday of a god, the unconquered sun. What if it was also the birthday of the Son of God? The linguistic coincidence was convenient in languages where sun and sun were similar. Christ could be the true sun, the true light that conquers darkness. Pope Julius I is sometimes credited with officially declaring December 25th as Christ's birthday around 350 AD. The choice was pragmatic. People were already celebrating. The church redirected the celebration. Keep your parties, the church essentially said. Keep your feasting, your gift-giving, your greenery, your lights. Just say they're for Jesus now. The strategy worked. Within a century or two, Christmas was established as a major Christian holiday throughout the Western world. But it brought its pagan cargo with it. The date was pagan. The decorations were pagan. The customs were pagan. Only the name and the theological meaning were Christian, and the Christians weren't just absorbing Roman traditions. As Christianity spread north, it absorbed Germanic and Norse traditions too. Yule merged with Christmas. The Yule log became the Christmas log. The 12 days of Yule became the 12 days of Christmas. The evergreen decorations, the feasting, the gift-giving, all of it folded into the Christian holiday. Christmas became a container. It held everything the cultures it conquered had put into winter celebration. Roman chaos, Germanic sacrifice, Norse mythology, Christian salvation. All of it mixed together. All of it called Christmas. But the church didn't just absorb holidays. It also absorbed saints and transformed them. One saint in particular would undergo a transformation so dramatic that his original identity would be completely lost. He would evolve from a violent, heretic-punching bishop into the jolly figure we now call Santa Claus. But before he was jolly, he was something far more complicated. There was a real Saint Nicholas. He actually existed. He was born around 2070 AD in Patara, a city in Lycia, in what is now southern Turkey. He became the bishop of Myra, another Lycian city, and died around 3040 AD. That's essentially all we know for certain. Nicholas lived during a pivotal time in Christian history. He was born when Christians were still being persecuted by the Roman Empire. He may have been imprisoned for his faith under the Emperor Diocletian. He lived to see Christianity become the official religion of Rome under Constantine. He allegedly attended the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD, the council that established Christian orthodoxy. But the details of his life are lost. He didn't write anything that survived. Contemporary accounts don't mention him. Everything we know about Nicholas comes from legends that developed centuries after his death, and those legends are extraordinary. The most famous Nicholas legend concerns 3 young women and bags of gold. According to the story, there was a poor man in Myra with 3 daughters. In the Roman world, daughters needed dowries to marry. Without a dowry, a woman couldn't find a husband. And without a husband, a woman without other resources had limited options: poverty, servitude, or prostitution. This man had no money. He faced the horrifying prospect of selling his daughters or watching them sell themselves. Nicholas heard about the family's plight. One night, he secretly approached the house and threw a bag of gold through the window. The gold provided a dowry for the eldest daughter, and she was able to marry. Nicholas did this twice more, once for each daughter. Each time, a bag of gold was thrown through the window in the dark of night. Secret generosity. Anonymous salvation. In some versions of the story, Nicholas threw the gold down the chimney, and it landed in stockings that had been hung by the fire to dry. This is the origin of several Christmas traditions. The bags of gold became the 3 gold balls that still symbolize pawnbrokers. The secret gift-giving became the basis for Santa leaving presents. And the stockings by the fire became the Christmas stockings we still hang today. The story is almost certainly not historical, but it captures something about how Nicholas was remembered as a secret benefactor, a protector of the vulnerable, someone who gave gifts in the night when no one was watching. The second great Nicholas legend is considerably darker. According to this story, a terrible famine struck the city of Myra. Food was desperately scarce. People were starving. A local butcher, some versions say innkeeper, saw an opportunity. 3 young boys, traveling alone, stopped at his establishment. The butcher murdered them. He chopped up their bodies, salted the flesh, and stored them in barrels of brine. He intended to sell the meat as pickled pork. Nicholas, through divine revelation, learned what had happened. He went to the butcher's shop. He confronted the murderer. And then he performed a miracle. Nicholas made the sign of the cross over the barrels. The 3 boys rose up, alive and whole. They had been resurrected, restored to life after being murdered and dismembered. This is a saint's legend. This is a story that was told to children in medieval Europe about the original Santa Claus. Think about that for a moment. The Christmas figure we now associate with cookies and reindeer was once associated with the resurrection of murdered, pickled children. The legend explains why Nicholas became particularly associated with children. He was their protector, their savior, the one who could rescue them from the most horrifying fates. He wasn't just a gift giver. He was a guardian against the darkness, a figure who stood between children and the terrors of the world. We'll return to this story later, because the butcher who murdered those children doesn't disappear from Christmas tradition. He becomes something else, a dark figure who follows St. Nicholas, punishing children rather than saving them. And then there's the violence. According to legend, Nicholas attended the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD. This was the council where Christian bishops gathered to resolve theological disputes and establish orthodox doctrine. The most contentious debate concerned the nature of Christ. Was Jesus fully divine, or was he a created being subordinate to God the Father? Arius, a priest from Alexandria, argued that Christ was created by God, that there was a time when the Son was not. This position, known as Arianism, had many supporters. Nicholas was not among them. During the council debates, according to the legend, Nicholas became so enraged by Arius's heresy that he walked across the room and slapped him in the face. Some versions say he punched him. Either way, a bishop physically assaulted another clergyman in the middle of the most important Christian council in history. The other bishops were horrified. Nicholas was stripped of his bishop's vestments and thrown into prison. Physical violence at a church council was unacceptable, regardless of how heretical the victim's theology. But then, according to the legend, Nicholas received a vision. Christ and the Virgin Mary appeared to him in his cell. They returned his vestments and his book of the Gospels, signifying divine approval. The other bishops, learning of this miracle, released Nicholas and restored him to his position. This story was told for centuries. It was depicted in icons and paintings. Nicholas slapping Arius was considered a heroic act, a defense of true doctrine against dangerous heresy. Santa Claus once punched a guy for theological disagreement. The Nicholas who emerges from these legends is not the jolly figure of modern imagination. He's fierce, violent, powerful. He's a protector, yes, but a warrior protector. He raises the dead and strikes heretics. He gives gifts, but also dispenses justice. This is the figure who would evolve into Santa Claus, and the evolution would take a very strange path. Nicholas died in Myra and was entombed there. His grave became a pilgrimage site, and his bones, like the bones of many saints, were believed to have miraculous properties. According to tradition, Nicholas's bones secreted a liquid called myrrh, or manna, a fragrant oil that was believed to have healing powers. This miracle made his relics particularly valuable. Pilgrims came from across the Christian world to pray at his tomb and collect the miraculous oil. In 1087, Italian merchants from the city of Bari decided they wanted those bones. Myra, by this point, was under threat from the Seljuk Turks. The merchants claimed they were rescuing the relics from potential desecration. They sailed to Myra, broke into the church, smashed open Nicholas's tomb, and stole his skeleton. This was theft, grave robbery. But in the medieval world, stealing relics was common and often celebrated if the theft was successful. Possession of powerful relics brought pilgrims, and pilgrims brought money. Cities competed for the best saints' bones. The merchants brought Nicholas's bones to Bari, where they were installed in a grand basilica. The Basilica of St. Nicholas still stands today, and Nicholas's bones are still there. Modern scientific testing has confirmed they date to the correct period and that the skeleton belonged to an elderly man from the Eastern Mediterranean. The theft made Nicholas a major saint in Western Europe. His cult spread rapidly. He became the patron saint of children, of sailors, of merchants, of pawnbrokers, of prisoners, and of various cities and countries. By the medieval period, he was one of the most popular saints in Christianity. His feast day was December 6th, the date of his death, or the date his bones arrived in Bari, depending on the tradition. And December 6th became a day for gift giving, for celebrating children, and for remembering the bishop who gave gold in the night and raised the dead from the barrels. Nicholas's cult was particularly strong in the Netherlands, where he was known as Sinterklaas, a Dutch contraction of Sint Nicolaas. Dutch Sinterklaas traditions developed their own distinctive character. Sinterklaas wasn't just a saint who was prayed to, he was a figure who arrived, in person, once a year. According to Dutch tradition, Sinterklaas lives in Spain. An odd detail, possibly connected to the Spanish Netherlands, or to the fact that Spain was exotic and far away. He arrives in the Netherlands by steamboat in mid-November, greeted by enormous public celebrations. He wears the vestments of a bishop red robes, a tall mitred hat, and carries a bishop's staff. He has a long, white beard. He rides a white horse, named Amerigo, that can walk across rooftops. On the night before his feast day, December 5th, children leave their shoes by the fireplace, filled with hay and carrots, for Sinterklaas' horse. Good children receive gifts in their shoes. This Dutch tradition. Sinterklaas arriving by boat, riding across rooftops, leaving gifts in shoes, is the direct ancestor of the American Santa Claus. Dutch settlers brought Sinterklaas to New Amsterdam, which became New York. The tradition survived and evolved. Sinterklaas became Santa Claus. The shoes became stockings. The horse became reindeer. December 5th became Christmas Eve. But before we trace that evolution, we need to talk about what happened to the bad children. Because for most of Christmas history, the gift bringer had a partner, a dark companion, someone to handle the punishments while Nicholas handled the rewards. We think of Santa as a solitary figure. maybe some elves in the background, or Mrs. Claus. But for centuries, the December gift giver traveled with something terrifying. Across Europe, under different names, this figure threatened to beat children with switches, stuff them in sacks, and drag them to hell. His most famous name is Krampus, and he's only one of many. Think about the problem created by the Christmas gift-giving tradition. If children receive gifts for being good, what happens to children who are bad? If there's no consequence for bad behavior, why be good at all? The system collapses into mere gift distribution, stripped of moral weight. Modern parents sometimes address this with the threat of coal in your stocking, or the idea that bad children receive nothing. But for most of Christmas history, the solution was far more dramatic. The gift giver needed a partner, a counterweight, someone whose job was punishment rather than reward. Across Europe, this dark companion took many forms, different names, different appearances, but the same function: terrorizing children into good behavior. While Saint Nicholas, Father Christmas, or Sinterklaas rewarded the virtuous, the dark companion punished the wicked. For centuries, Christmas was as much about fear as about joy, at least for children. The most famous of these figures is Krampus. Krampus appears in alpine regions: Austria, Bavaria, Switzerland, parts of northern Italy, and neighboring areas. His name comes from the German word krampen, meaning claw. He is half goat, half demon. He has dark fur covering his body, cloven hooves, long curved horns, and a grotesque face with a long, lolling tongue. He is the monstrous opposite of saintly Nicholas. Krampus accompanies Saint Nicholas on his December rounds, specifically on December 5th, the night before Nicholas his feast day. While Nicholas rewards good children with gifts, Krampus deals with the bad ones. Krampus carries switches meant to remind children of what awaited them if they misbehaved. He carries chains, heavy iron chains that he rattles ominously. According to some traditions, the chains represent the binding of the devil by the Christian Church. Krampus is a demon under the Church's control, forced to serve Nicholas, and he carries a basket or sack on his back. This is where the truly wicked children go. Krampus stuffs them into his basket and carries them away to his lair in the mountains or directly to hell. The threat was explicit: if you were bad enough, Krampus would drag you to damnation. The tradition survives today. Krampusnacht, is still celebrated on December 5th in alpine communities. Young men dress in elaborate Krampus costumes: fur suits, carved wooden masks, chains, switches. They roam the streets in what's called a Krampuslauf, a Krampus run, chasing people, swatting at them with birch branches, making as much noise and terror as possible. It's both terrifying and carnivalesque. The costumes are genuinely frightening. The participants often drink heavily. The line between tradition and chaos is deliberately blurred. Krampus was suppressed for periods. The Catholic Church and later the fascist governments of the 20th century tried to eliminate him as either pagan or inappropriate, but he kept coming back. The tradition was too popular, too deeply rooted to be destroyed. In recent decades, Krampus has experienced a revival. He's become a pop culture phenomenon, appearing in movies, TV shows, and greeting cards. He's been partially domesticated, turned into something more cute than terrifying. But in the alpine villages where the tradition never died, Krampusnacht is still genuinely frightening. The costumes are disturbing. The energy is chaotic. And behind the spectacle is a reminder: Christmas has always had a dark side. In France, the dark companion is called Père Fouettard, Father Whipper. Remember the legend of the pickled children, the butcher who murdered 3 boys and stored them in barrels until Saint Nicholas resurrected them. According to French tradition, that butcher became Père Fouettard. After Nicholas exposed his crime and performed the miracle, the butcher was condemned to follow Nicholas forever, serving as his dark assistant. His punishment is eternal service. he can never escape. He must accompany Nicholas on every journey, forever reminded of the children he murdered. And his job now is to whip the naughty children. Père Fouettard is usually depicted as a sinister figure in dark robes, often with a scraggly beard and wild hair. He carries a whip or switch. He accompanies St. Nicholas on December 6th, dispensing punishments while Nicholas dispenses rewards. Think about the theological message here. A child murderer, redeemed through forced service to the saint he wronged, now punishes wicked children instead of killing them. It's a story about justice, about penance, about the possibility of redemption even for the most horrific sinners. But for a child hearing this story, the message is simpler. A murderer follows Father Christmas. Be good, or the murderer will whip you. In German regions and among the Pennsylvania Dutch communities who preserved German traditions in America, there was Belsnickel. Belsnickel is a fur-clad, ragged figure who arrives in the weeks before Christmas. He wears tattered clothing, sometimes covered with bells, hence the name from pels, meaning fur. He has a dirty face, a wild appearance. He looks like a vagrant, a frightening stranger. Belsnickel doesn't work with a kindly companion. He handles both rewards and punishments himself. He would enter homes, usually while children were gathered together, and quiz them. Did they know their prayers? Could they recite their catechism? Had they been obedient to their parents? In one hand, he carried a switch. In the other, candy or small treats. Children who answered correctly and demonstrated good behavior received candy. Children who failed received the switch. Sometimes he would throw the candy on the ground. When children scrambled to pick it up, he would swat at their hands and backs with his switch. The pleasure of candy was mixed with the pain of punishment. The message was constant. Even gifts come with a reminder of the consequences of bad behavior. Belsnickel survived in Pennsylvania, Dutch communities into the 20th century. Some families still remember the tradition, though it's largely faded. He was never quite as famous as Krampus, but for American children in Pennsylvania and beyond, he was the face of Christmas terror. In the Netherlands, Sinterklaas is accompanied by a figure called Zwarte Piet, Black Pete. Traditionally, Zwarte Piet was depicted by white performers in dark makeup, red lips, curly black wigs, and Renaissance-style clothing. He's Sinterklaas's helper, often depicted as mischievous and playful rather than purely threatening. He climbs down chimneys, which supposedly explains his blackened face, though this explanation is widely considered a later rationalization. He helps distribute gifts, but he also carries a switch for bad children. And in older traditions, he carries a bag not to deliver gifts, but to stuff bad children into and carry them away to Spain. Zwarte Piet has become one of the most controversial figures in European Christmas traditions. Critics argue that the character is clearly rooted in racist imagery, that blackface is inherently offensive, and that the subservient relationship between white Sinterklaas and Black Pete echoes colonial and slave owner dynamics. Defenders argue that the character is beloved, that the tradition is innocent, and that the blackness is from chimney soot, not racial caricature. The debate has been fierce in the Netherlands, with annual protests, political arguments, and attempts at compromise. Sooty Pete's with just a few smudges, rather than full blackface. It reveals how these traditions carry uncomfortable histories, how figures that seem innocent in one context can be deeply problematic in another. The origins of Zwarte Piet are genuinely unclear. Some scholars connect him to earlier dark companions like Krampus. Some point to Moorish or Turkish servants in medieval European iconography. Some note that black-faced demon figures appear in pre-Christian European folklore. Whatever his origins, Zwarte Piet demonstrates that these Christmas companion figures were never simple. They carried meanings and associations that reflected the cultures that created them, including the darkest aspects of those cultures. Iceland's Christmas terror is different from the rest of Europe. There's no St. Nicholas figure at all. Instead, there's Grela. Grela is a giant ogress who lives in the mountains. She has hooves, 13 tails, and an insatiable appetite. Her favorite food is misbehaving children. During the Christmas season, Grela descends from her mountain home. She searches for naughty children, snatches them up, stuffs them in her bag, and carries them back to her cave, where she boils them in a stew. This is not a figure who beats children or threatens hell. She eats them. Grela's sons are the Yule lads, 13 trollish figures who arrive one by one in the 13 nights before Christmas. Originally, they were threatening figures like their mother, each with a particular form of mischief. Their names reflect their troublesome behaviors. Stikjastaur, sheep, Coat-clawed, Giljagour, Gullygawk, Stouffer, Stover, Stovey, Veruslikir, Spoon licker, Potaskeffiel, Pot scraper, Oscuslikir, bowl, Licker, Herthuskallikir, bowl, Licker, Herthuskeller, Door slammer, Skygamore, Skydamore, Gobbler, Bujnekrokir, sausage, Swiper, Gluggagogir, window, Peeper, Gata Efir, doorway, Sniffer, Kidcrocker, Meathook, and Kirkaznikir, candle stealer. In modern times, children leave shoes on their windowsills, and each night, a different Yule lad leaves a small gift or a rotten potato for bad children. But Grula remains. She still haunts Icelandic Christmas, and so does the Yule cat. The Yule cat, Jólakatturinn, is an enormous black cat that prowls the countryside on Christmas Eve. It preys on people who haven't received new clothes before Christmas. If you don't have at least one new garment, new socks, a new sweater, anything, the Yule cat will eat you. This is a remarkably specific threat, and it served a practical purpose, encouraging employers and parents to provide new clothing for workers and children before the holiday. The fear of being eaten by a giant cat incentivized generosity. Iceland's Christmas traditions were designed to terrify. They reflect the harsh conditions of life on a volcanic island in the North Atlantic, where winter darkness lasted months and survival was never guaranteed. The terrors of Christmas reflected the terrors of life. In Wales, during the Christmas season, something strange would come to your door: a horse skull. A real horse skull, mounted on a pole, decorated with ribbons and bells, its jaws rigged to snap open and closed. 2 holes cut for eyes, sometimes with light shining through from within. The skull is covered with a white sheet, hiding the person carrying it. This is Mari Lwyd, the gray mare, and she comes with sailing. A group of people would carry Mari Lwyd from house to house, singing. When they reached a door, they would request entry through song, but entry was not automatic. The householders had to engage in pínko, a battle of rhyming insults and challenges, sung back and forth. If Mari Lwyd's team won the rhyming battle, if they outsung the householders, they gained entry. Once inside, they would expect food and drink. Mari Lwyd herself would chase people around the room, her skull jaws snapping. The tradition is ancient, probably pre-Christian. It may be connected to hobby horse traditions found across Britain and Europe, or to older horse cults. The meaning has been lost. What remains is the uncanny image, a literal death's head, demanding entry to your home on a winter's night. Mari Lwyd survives in some Welsh communities. She's been revived as folk tradition, but encountering her in the darkness, with her snapping jaws and hollow eyes, remains unsettling. We've sanitized Christmas. We've removed the terror. Modern American Christmas has Santa Claus. Jolly, fat, unthreatening, and nothing else. There's no Krampus, no Père Fouettard, no Belsnickel. The worst that happens to bad children is coal in their stocking. And everyone knows that's mostly a joke. But for most of Christmas history, in most of Europe, the holiday came with genuine fear. Children were told that demons would beat them, stuff them in sacks, drag them to hell, or eat them alive. Christmas was a morally serious time. The stakes were real. This wasn't just cruelty. It served a purpose. It gave the gift-giving moral weight. It made good behavior meaningful because bad behavior had consequences. It balanced the light with darkness, the rewards with punishments. And it reflected something true about the world. Winter was dangerous, darkness was real, and life was precarious. The monsters of Christmas embodied the threats that surrounded every family: starvation, cold, violence, death. By personifying these fears, by ritualizing them, communities could face them together. We've eliminated the darkness from Christmas. We've made it purely happy, purely commercial, purely sweet. What have we lost? For centuries, Christmas was a wild, chaotic, sometimes terrifying celebration with pagan roots, demonic companions, and social disorder. It looked nothing like the cozy family holiday we imagine. And then something remarkable happened. The Puritans decided it was evil. They didn't try to reform Christmas. They tried to abolish it entirely. And for a while, in England and America, they succeeded. Christmas was illegal. The Puritans knew everything we've discussed. They knew Christmas was pagan. They knew the date was borrowed from Roman sun worship. They knew the trees and the greenery and the feasting came from pre-Christian traditions. And they drew the obvious conclusion: Christmas was a lie. It was paganism dressed in Christian clothing. The Puritans wanted to purify Christianity, to return to the pure faith described in the Bible. And Christmas wasn't in the Bible. The apostles didn't celebrate it. The early Christians didn't celebrate it. It was a late addition, a pagan compromise, a corruption. But it wasn't just the pagan origins that bothered them. It was how Christmas was actually celebrated. Medieval and early modern Christmas celebrations retained elements of Roman chaos. Christmas was a time of drinking, excessive drinking. The 12 days of Christmas were a period of ongoing celebration, and that celebration was wet with sailing, caroling, feasting, toasting. Alcohol flowed freely. Christmas was a time of disorder. Mummers and wassailers would roam the streets, often masked, demanding entry to homes and demanding food and drink. The tradition could easily shade into extortion, give us treats or face tricks. Lords of misrule were appointed to preside over the festivities, with the usual social order temporarily inverted. Christmas was a time of sexual license. For Puritans obsessed with sexual purity, this was deeply troubling. And Christmas was popish. It was associated with Catholicism, with the Mass, with rituals and ceremonies the Puritans despised. For the Puritans, Christmas was a concentrated dose of everything wrong with Christianity, paganism, Catholicism, drunkenness, disorder, superstition, and sin. It had to go. In the 1640s, the Puritans got their chance during the English Civil War. Parliament was dominated by Puritans, and they won. England became a republic dominated by Oliver Cromwell. In 1647, Parliament passed an ordinance abolishing Christmas. The law stated that December 25th would henceforth be a day of fasting and humiliation, not celebration. Markets and shops were to remain open. Work was to continue. Churches were to remain closed. Christmas was illegal. Enforcing the ban was not easy. Soldiers were deployed to patrol the streets on December 25th. They would break up gatherings, confiscate decorations, and arrest anyone caught celebrating. But people resisted. Christmas was popular. In Canterbury in 1647, a riot broke out when the town crier announced that Christmas would not be observed. Shops that tried to stay open were attacked. Similar disturbances occurred in other cities. People also celebrated secretly. Behind closed doors, in private homes, families would gather for Christmas dinner. The rituals went underground. Carols were sung quietly. Decorations were hidden inside. The ban lasted until 1660. When the monarchy was restored under Charles II. The Restoration brought back many of the traditions the Puritans had suppressed. Theaters reopened, sports resumed, and Christmas returned. But it wasn't quite the same. 13 years of suppression had disrupted the continuity of tradition. Some customs were lost or weakened. Christmas survived the Puritan assault, but it was wounded. And in the following centuries, it would fade further, becoming a minor holiday, barely observed, overshadowed by other celebrations. It would take the Victorians to resurrect it. The Puritans who settled New England brought their hatred of Christmas with them. In 1659, the Massachusetts Bay Colony passed a law banning Christmas, stating that whosoever was found observing it would be fined 5 shillings. The ban was repealed in 1681, but cultural hostility persisted for generations. America was essentially founded by people who didn't celebrate Christmas, or who celebrated it only privately and inconsistently. The national Christmas we know today is not a founding tradition. It's a later development, constructed deliberately in the 19th century. By the early 1800s, Christmas was a shadow of what it had been. The rise of industrialization had disrupted the continuity of Christmas customs. Factory workers didn't get 12 days off. They were lucky to get 1 day. Migration from countryside to city broke the chains of tradition. What remained of Christmas was often just drinking. The holiday needed saving, and it was about to be saved by writers and artists in a prince from Germany. In 1890, the American writer Washington Irving published essays depicting an idealized, nostalgic Christmas. Irving was inventing a past that hadn't quite existed, manufacturing sentiment, but it worked. His essays gave people a vision of what Christmas should be. In 1823, a poem was published anonymously in a New York newspaper, A Visit from St. Nicholas, now known as "'Twas the Night Before Christmas." This single poem created the template for Santa Claus. Before this poem, there was no standard Santa Claus. After this poem, he rides a sleigh pulled by 8 flying reindeer, comes down the chimney, and fills stockings. He's a right jolly old elf, chubby and white-bearded. A single poem created the central figure of American Christmas. In 1843, Charles Dickens wrote A Christmas Carol in 6 Weeks. It was a redemption story, a ghost story, and a social critique that established what Christmas should mean, not just feasting, but charity toward the poor. Dickens didn't just describe Christmas, he defined it. Every modern Christmas movie about redemption descends from A Christmas Carol. In 1840, Queen Victoria married Prince Albert, who brought the German Christmas tree tradition to England. In 1848, an engraving of the royal family gathered around their Christmas tree was published. Victoria was beloved. If the royal family had a tree, everyone wanted one. Within 2 decades, they had spread to America. Also, in 1843, Sir Henry Cole commissioned the first printed Christmas card. What had been a convenience for a busy man became a social obligation for everyone. The Victorians did not preserve ancient Christmas traditions. They invented new ones and called them ancient. The traditional Christmas is a Victorian invention. It's less than 200 years old. It was created within a few decades of the mid-19th century by specific individuals making specific choices, and we inherited it, thinking it was timeless. The Victorians invented Christmas, but they didn't finish the job. It would take the 20th century and American capitalism to create the Santa we know. In 1931, Coca-Cola launched a winter advertising campaign featuring a Santa Claus painted by Haddon Sundblom. Sundblom created a Santa that was warm, grandfatherly, and dressed in bright red, Coca-Cola's brand color. Coca-Cola standardized Santa. After their campaign, there was one Santa, and he looked like a Coca-Cola advertisement. Then came department store Santas. In 1890, James Edgar dressed as Santa to walk the floor of his store. By the early 1900s, every major store had a Santa. This created an association that persists today. Santa equals shopping. Meeting Santa means going to a store. Children are trained from their earliest years to associate Christmas joy with commerce. Mandatory mass gift-giving is also a modern development. The Christmas shopping season was invented by retailers to encourage the idea that Christmas required gifts and that shopping should start early. The average American household spends over $1,000 on Christmas gifts, and many go into debt. We've transformed a festival of generosity into an economic obligation. The Christmas spirit we experience is often manufactured by commercials designed to trigger sentimental responses. The Hallmark Channel and others produce dozens of new Christmas movies every year that are vehicles for advertising. Commerce has captured Christmas. Dickens wrote A Christmas Carol as a critique of capitalism, and now the holiday he helped create is the centerpiece of consumer capitalism. But the cost of modern Christmas isn't just financial, it's human. Behind every present, there's a supply chain often rooted in grueling conditions in Chinese factories or sweatshops in Bangladesh. We've made Christmas into a performance, and performances are exhausting. After tracing Christmas from pagan origins through religious absorption and Victorian invention, what are we actually celebrating? Underneath everything is the winter solstice, the longest night of the year when darkness reaches its peak and begins to retreat. Every winter, celebration returns to this. We are creatures who fear the dark and celebrate when the light returns. The specific forms are cultural constructions, but the core impulse is universal. We need to pause in the middle of winter. We need to gather with others against the cold. We need to give gifts as expressions of connection. We need to light candles and fires against the darkness. We need to tell stories and sing songs. We need to believe, even briefly, in magic. When you celebrate Christmas, you're celebrating with ghosts of pagans, Romans, saints, monsters, and Puritans. Christmas is the strangest holiday, a birthday party for someone born in spring held on a pagan sun festival featuring a Turkish bishop who became a Norse god, who became a Coca-Cola mascot. And yet, when the lights go up in the darkness of December, the human need to push back against the dark remains. The longest night will pass. The sun will return. May you find a moment of genuine warmth in the cold. May the light you kindle mean something, and may you make it to spring. Happy Solstice. Merry Christmas. The light returns. Thank you for journeying with us through Christmas's hidden history. Thank you for keeping the candle lit. Thank you for remembering what we've forgotten. Until next time.